Well, hello there, and welcome to our second edition today of Johnny Davis Alive, where we'll be celebrating the life, the grand life of Steve Nasty Anderson. And trust me, he was not nasty at all, but he was a good fighter. But we have some special guests here who are going to pay tribute to him and let everyone who did not know about this great man know a little bit more about him today. Some of our guests will have the PKA president. He was the man with the plan back in the day with kickboxing. He still is great, doing great things with the PKA. Mr. Joe Corley, he's out of Atlanta, Georgia. And we'll also have from Canada, Ottawa, Canada, in fact, where I think Mr. Anderson actually resided. Mr. Jean Therien, and Mr. Jean-Yves Theriault. And obviously, some of you in the kickboxing world will know Jean-Yves Theriault for sure, because he was one of the greatest kickboxing legends in our sport. So we're looking forward to speaking with all three of these gentlemen today as they share their stories about Mr. Steve Nasty Anderson, who we lost last week in a bout. I think it was Parkinson's, but they can explain that if they like. But this man did some great things. Let me just quickly share with you my feelings about Mr. Anderson coming up. Was being in point karate, and that's the way most of us started, that there were certain people that you had to get to, you had to beat, right? And he was all in the magazines, and everything. So we were trying to get to Mr. Anderson, and we knew if we got to him, we would be number one, because he was number one for like, I don't know how many years. We'll find out more about that. But he was the man to beat. Big guy, muscular, strong, as you can see, and all, great attitude and all. But I just want to say that as a point karate fighter who also won the bout of Atlanta and won a lot of grand championships, I was pretty good, but this guy was great. There's a difference between good and great. And today we're going to celebrate him and hear some great stories about some of the great things that he did in the sport. As always, we want to thank our sponsors, Blackout Fights at blackoutfights.com and Eastern Offset Printing for their support. So without any further ado, who will speak to first? Let's talk with the man with the plan, Mr. Joe Corley. How are you, sir?
I'm good, sir. Good to be with you again.
Good. Thanks so much for coming on today. We lost Nasty Anderson on last week after a long bout with an illness, but he lived such a big life before then. I want you to take a moment, if you will, and just share some of your thoughts and memories of Mr. Nasty Anderson.
Yeah, certainly. I just had lunch with Keith Vitale, and Keith Vitale, was number one in the country for 3 years in a row, and he crossed paths with Nasty, right from the first time that Nasty became a national fighter on the national scene. In fact, he was telling me today a story about the two of them meeting in Nasty's first year as a black belt with Mike Stone as the center referee there in Los Angeles. So it was in Nasty's hometown and all that. And Steve Anderson was fighting during a time, Johnny, when I was traveling the world doing the PKA events. The years that he started on the national scene were probably years where I was producing 40 or 45 PKA events in different cities around the world. So I ended up coming to the Battle of Atlanta, and we actually broadcast the Diamond Nationals and the U.S. Open in those years to bring some visibility to the point fighters at those events. But those were the only events that I would actually get to be at. So interestingly enough, in the early part of Steve Anderson's career, I didn't get the chance to see him except at those specific events. And, he and I got a chance to talk at length back in 2017 at June Ree's special event that we did at Dennis Brown's tournament, which was the who's who in martial arts that year. That's when we first started seeing that Steve was having some symptoms, and I don't think he had even diagnosed yet with the Parkinson's. And so we had some good heart-to-heart things. you know, since I was a Vitale guy and he was a non-Vitale guy,
Right, 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 right.
there was always some friction back then. But he stood up at that event, just to give you an idea of the kind of guy he was. He stood up at that event at June Reed's thing. He said, before we go any further, may I say something about Joe Corley? And man, oh, oh my God, what is he going to say? And he told this story about how when he first came to the Battle of Atlanta, there was a fighter whose bag had been sitting in the hallway in a hotel, and someone had stolen $400 out of his bag, and he was
Whoa.
there with absolutely no cash. And and then Kathy, who's now Kathy Vitale, came by, and at the time I happened to be standing there, and she told me what had happened. So Kathy she was carrying the cash around from the battle. That was before everybody was paying with credit cards and
Right,
online
right.
and all that. And so she gave the guy $400
Wow.
in and and we said, you know, this should never happen at the Battle of Atlanta. And so uh, Steve actually told that story, and I just went, good. I'm glad it was a good story and not a bad story. But that stuck with him, and it was interesting to have him do that and say that at that time. And so really, that was the first glimpse for me into what was the heart and soul that I've heard so many people talk about since then of Steve Anderson.
Well, how many times did he competed in the Bout of Atlanta? Many, many years, correct?
Yeah, I think he missed some of them, but I think he had told me that he was there 5 or 6 times. I wish he probably was there more times than I was during those particular years.
Well,
Uh, but he was a force to be reckoned with, and of course he talked about Jeff Smith. We wish we could have Jeff Smith with us today, but he's on an airplane.
mm,
Um, he talked about Jeff Smith as being his mentor because he fought on Jeff's team a number of times when they went to Europe on the Waco teams and things.
mm,
And Jeff spoke very, very, very highly of Steve and just always held him in the highest regard, not
right,
only as a good being, but as a great athlete. He had the size and the strength. He had played football. He had done well in other
right.
sports as well. And he committed himself to training in the martial arts with the same level of professionalism that he did when he was playing football.
Well, just speaking of his competitiveness, that he seems kind of, is that where that nasty came from? That I mean, because I mean, he was out there to try to win. I mean, granted, they were trying to score points, but he was pretty aggressive out there.
You know, I think that was part of it. You know, and as you said at the opening, he was anything but nasty in terms of a person. But
Right,
I think fighting spirit must have been, you know, a lot of times those of us that are sick people will say, man, that was a nasty punch. That was a nasty
right,
kick.
right, right,
Wasn't really meant as nasty, you know, like he was a nasty human being. It was
right.
like it was, it was a beautiful punch. It was a beautiful kick. So I think nasty was probably that part of the jargon as opposed to the other.
Right, right. Well, he was also, we talked about his size. He was kind of intimidating looking, if you will. But I remember, back in the day, they didn't quite do weight divisions. Well, we did weight divisions, but for the grand championship, they would take the lightest of them and put them with the heaviest of them, and everybody fought.
Correct.
I know that for a fact. And who I talked to briefly yesterday was the smallest of them, Tony Young. It looked
Oh,
like David and Goliath out there. Tell me
yeah.
a little bit about those fights.
Just I was going to tell you that I'm gonna actually post that fight in the next few days.
Okay.
We've been working on our PK library for the last half a year, and it's going to be, we can't talk about where it's going to be yet, but it's going to be broadcast internationally here in the next little while. And that's one of the fights that people will see on it will be Nasty Anderson against Tony Young for the grand championship and
Wow.
ring at the Battle of Atlanta, because that night I think we had Jeff Gripper fighting Mike Brennan or someone like that as the main event card for ESPN.
Hmm,
So
hmm.
it was an ESPN fight with the two of them.
What stood out to you most about the man, Steve Anderson?
Well, in the years that I saw him, post fighting, it was that he was a very humble guy. And on my 10th degree black belt certificate from the PKC from Glen Keaney, um, the phrase is often discussed about what is the humility of a grandmaster and what is the humility of these top fighters. And as you and I and John Therien know, when we're around people like John Therien, when we're around Johnny Davis, when we're around great fighters, Jeff Smith, Bill Wallace, they're really very humble in private. And I
Right.
saw Steve Anderson. He wasn't always talking about himself and his accolades. He was really talking about other people. And I think that humility is one of the things that really attracted so many people to him. So he seemed a humble person, and that's why I would always say not nasty.
Right, right. Well, somebody said he was quite the jokester. Do you know anything about that?
He wasn't around me just because our relationship wasn't like that, and we really didn't get to talk a whole lot until 2017. But I've read from Jeff Smith, who is always joking. I mean, you can never get away from joking.
Right.
Yeah, and he said that it was always tit for tat with Steve.
Right, right, right. That's great. One of the things I want to ask you before I bring on Mr. Therien and Mr. Jean-Yves is about this picture has always kind of confused me, and I'm going to ask you about it because there's something about it I don't think I knew. So he has on, back in the day, we used to wear the long trousers and the boxing gloves. Now that's the way I looked when I fought in the ring in full contact. Did he ever fight in the ring?
Well, I don't know that he did full contact fighting. I would imagine that if he did some seminars somewhere
Right.
or was doing some exhibitions, that if he was in that kind of shape, it would be impressive for him to look like a full
Yes.
or a kickboxer in the ring.
Right.
And
Right.
he obviously had the strength, the skill, the speed, the timing, the distance, and all that to have done well. So I would imagine that, I would think if I was promoting a demonstration match with him, I think it'd be great for him to look like that. It would be more appealing to the audience. It would, point fighting sadly doesn't get the kind of credit that it deserves.
Right.
If you're going to fight an MMA fighter, you're not best served to fight at a kickboxing range. You're better served to fight at a point fighting range and get in and hit the person in the face with your 4 ounce gloves on, and then get the heck out of there, Rick Rufus style. Hit
Right.
and move. Strike and go. And so uh, for that reason, because and as you know, over the years, point fighting got to be less and less. Let's say, what would be the politically correct way to say it? Got to be less and less dangerous looking. And so, for Steve Anderson to be looking like he was in that picture, it would make him look more formidable than it would if he had his uniform
Right.
on with some hand pads or
Well,
something.
I have the PKB now, so that look is kind of, although most people wear shorts, but that look is kind of, what it's impressive for me. I like to see it. Well, you mentioned Mr. John Therien a little bit earlier, and so I want to take a moment to go ahead and bring Mr. Therien and Mr. Jean-Yves Theriault up. And let's see what's going on with those fellows there. They're out of Ottawa, Canada. If you look to the left of your screen right there, the guy whose head's barely in, that is Mr. Jean-Yves Theriault, one of the greatest kickboxers ever. And I mean that. And then to the right there of the screen, I think you would say maybe with a mustache, that would be Mr. Therien, who was actually the promoter and I believe trainer. I know he owns a big gym over in Ottawa. How are you gentlemen doing today?
Well, we're doing pretty good, and it's always nice to celebrate somebody's life, especially when we got to know him and that he was a great champion. And I'm going to start off, then I'm going to turn it over to the Iceman, and he can go a little bit more detail.
Yes.
Last November 1st, we have an event called Capital Conquest, and we needed to raise money for a charity, Make a Wish Foundation, children with a terminal disease. They wanted $10,000. So being the promoter that I am and the nice guy that I am, I said,
Right.
Yves, I got to fight for you. He said, are you crazy? I'm 65 years old almost.
Right.
But I told him it was to help a kid, so he stepped in the ring. And we raised 25,000, and we had Bill Wallace fighting Wally Slokey. So that said, it was a big evening, and there was a couple of thousand people there, and Mr.
Wow.
Corley was there also. And Jean-Yves and I thought that it was proper and the right place to honor Steve Anderson because he is from Ottawa now. He's been here many years. And so everybody and their grandmother was at the fight because Jean-Yves was in the ring, Bill Wallace was in the ring.
Wow.
So
Wow.
now you got to remember that Steve had just problems to walk. You had to help him because of the Parkinson. So we had an incredible presentation for him. He got up. We had a special table at ringside, and he walked to the ring. He was being assisted. He stepped up the ladder to the ring, and he wanted to get in the ring.
Ah, of course.
Boy, I mean, you talk about fighting and that karate spirit, for life. And I just grabbed him at the ring and I said, you can't step in the ring, brother, because we might have problems to bring you out.
Right.
But he was a fighter to the end, and the people came to see him, and he signed autograph, and he said to me in my ear, says, I'll be back, blood. Don't worry. Right?
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's awesome. So how long did he live in Ottawa? Did he live in Ottawa all of his life?
No, actually, Steve is from San Diego, California. And I believe his ashes will be spread or interred in San Diego as well. He moved to Ottawa maybe after I went to Atlanta for my first fight, the prestigious Battle of Atlanta. And that's where I met Steve, and we briefly spoke. He was obviously involved with the point karate, and I was
Johnny, can I have you come more into the camera, please, so I can see your face?
Sure.
So we can see that handsome face.
Yeah,
A little bit more.
I told you before I had a
Yes,
mustache. I still have the mustache, but it's in my ear now.
Right, yeah. Right. Oh, that's terrible. You said that. I didn't.
Anyways, for the first moment I saw Steve and I spoke to him, I liked him. No nonsense kind of guy. His training style, his fighting style, his coaching style. He was completely committed to what he was doing, and I really, really enjoyed. And we bumped into each other briefly, periodically over the years. And he came to some of our events, and he had some fighters come to our events. And he was always very, very kind and respectful to both John, Theriault, and myself. And maybe the impression that people had of him was that he was not respectful or kind because he was gruff and he was, to the point. But he had a big heart. That guy had a really big heart. He was always interested in helping.
Mm-hmm.
We have a training camp here in one of the smaller cities around Ottawa, and he would bring his ring. He would bring some of his fighters, and he would spend the day with us. And we always had a good time with him.
Did he do kickboxing? I was asking Mr. Corley a little bit earlier.
I don't think he did, Johnny. I think he boxed. But in actual kickboxing, I don't think he did, although he did train like that because he had a couple of fighters here that were successful in their own, on their own. Ben Stewart comes to mind. He's been champion for a couple of years as well. And there's a couple of really good fighters in the area here. And Steve, some way, was involved with these people. And like I say, he was a hard coach to work with, but he got results.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we can't be great being easy. There's no doubt about that.
That's right.
Mr. Joe Corley, in the final days of Mr. Anderson, he wasn't doing as well, but he seemed to have a pretty good spirit. What kind of things did you talk about?
Well, when I went to Ottawa to the event that John and Jean-Yves put on up there to raise the money for the Make-A-Wish Foundation, I had been introduced to a product just before that called a product that was that has something in it called astaxanthin, and it has been known to really help with Parkinson's. So I put
Mm,
it in my luggage and took it up there to Canada, and so I had a chance to talk to Ben Stewart more about it. It was a little hard to talk with Steve at the time, but we talked about we I didn't realize he was as far along as he was. So we talked at that time more about his illness than anything, and it was so busy up there with John and Jean-Yves. I didn't get to really spend a lot of time with him. Am,
right.
am I correct, John? Was he able to stay right through to the end of the event, or did he have to leave a little early?
Jean-Yves? Yeah, Joe was asking you a question.
I,
Unfortunately, I can't hear Joe.
Oh, you
oh,
can't hear. What was the question, Mr. Corley?
I was he was asking me about the time we got to spend with Steve there in Ottawa, and I didn't know if he had been able to stay through to the end of the event, and I thought John might know if he had to leave early or not.
Yeah, Mr. Corley was asking, did Mr. Anderson, was he able to stay for that event that you guys did? Did he stay till the end?
Yes,
I believe he did.
he did.
He was there for the beginning. We did a presentation for him. We certainly honored him. The people that were there, very respectful of him and his accomplishments. But I do believe he did stay for the event. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to. I wasn't able to spend some time with him. Afterwards, we were quite busy in that weekend, as Mr. Corley will attest to. Had a big weekend, but
Yes.
I spoke to him prior to that, and evidently the fighting spirit was always with him.
Right, right. I think about again when we talked about Mr. Kobe Bryant earlier, and we talked about greatness and what he accomplished in basketball. I'm telling you, when it comes to the point karate world and what he accomplished in that world, he was kind of like the Kobe Bryant of martial arts. Would you say, Mr. Corley?
Yeah, I was thinking about those kinds of comparisons myself. It's a shame that our fighters and stars hadn't received the same kinds of coverage that, say, a Kobe Bryant had. But I think I see that in so many of our top guys. Jean-Yves, Jeff Smith, Bill Wallace, Johnny Davis, Steve Anderson. So many of our guys are giving back in ways that nobody really knows about. Help so many people. They just don't get the same public adulation.
Right, right. But he's certainly a great fighter. Mr. Therien.
Yes, sir.
There you go. What were some of your lasting memories of Mr. Anderson? Things
Well,
that,
outside of being a great athlete, he was also a real funny man, a real clown, and nobody really knew that.
right.
And about 10 years ago, I did a radio talk show with him. I never laughed as much as I did on that talk show. He was telling a story when maybe it was at the Battle of Atlanta, I'm not sure, but he says, I knew I was going to fight Billy Blanks. Okay. And he said, so what I did, there was like a motel type of residence where they were. He said, the
Right.
night before the tournament, I took a chair and I parked myself in front of his door, and I had a bottle of whiskey, but it was like tea in it, but it looked like whiskey.
Okay.
He kept sipping, and he says, I'm going to kick your ass, Blanks. You'll see tomorrow. I'm going to kick your ass. It was so funny the way he
Wow.
said it. And he says, I was just trying to get into his head. And I said, did it work? He said, yeah, I won. But he had different sayings for different things, and to me that stays with me. I've been fortunate being surrounded by a fantastic athlete, of which he was one of them, and he would say, when you fight a lightweight, they're like mosquitoes. You gotta squat them early.
Right, right.
Yeah, on and on. And
Nice.
he would come out with some beautiful things. So for me, I have nice memories of him in that world. And like Jean-Yves said earlier, we could call him and say, Nasty, we need your ring because we're doing a promotion. He would get the car or the truck, put the trailer on it, put the ring in it.
Wow.
Come, I tell you, I mean, he was all and everything. And it's going to be a loss because He's gone, but his contribution will stay for a long time.
Oh,
He
yes.
did he did produce some good fighters. He did make in Canada. He was known, and when he showed up in Canada, he was with a friend of ours, Rick Lortie. But John Duvris in Ottawa, who has a great school, who was a great fighter, is the one who brought Nasty over in Ottawa to do seminars. And I think he fell in love with the city and
Right.
definitely with the competitors and the people in martial arts. When he started to compete in Canada, a lot of people didn't know who he was, but they learned quickly that the
Right.
big guy was for real, you know?
Right. He was as fast as a lightweight as well. Mr. Corley,
Incredible.
I know you have to go in a second, Mr. Corley. But how do you think Mr. Anderson will be remembered, or how should he be remembered?
Well, I think the stories like John was saying about the sense of humor and what we were saying about his humility and being able to mix all that together. The question you ask about Kobe Bryant might be the best way to answer it. He's being remembered, not only as one of the greatest basketball players of all time, but one of the nicest, most giving human beings. And I think that would be a great way for him to be remembered. And one of the things I was going to say earlier is that a few weeks before the event there in Ottawa that John promoted, his friend and student Ben Stewart put on a great tribute for Steve there, and Jean-Yves and John Therien uh, got tables of supporters there, and made some great contributions.
Nice.
And I'm hoping that today you'll be able to direct people to the post that you have on your page or on my page that can help do a fundraiser for Steve's family. They're calling it the in memory of Steve Anderson and the transition. As Jean-Yves said, they're going to take his ashes to San Diego, and so there's going to be a lot of costs involved with that and costs for the family. So. If you can direct people to that Ben Stewart fundraiser, that would be great.
Yes, we have that up on our page right now. If anyone would love to donate what you should donate or would like to donate to this great cause, great man, did some great things for martial arts. You can go to Facebook and see that information, or it's right there on the screen right now. Mr. Joe Corley, I really want to thank you for
Yeah.
as well for all of your contributions, all the
Well,
things that I know that you have done, and I know that you will do in the sport, because I know you're out there working. I can just see it on your face. You're working
yeah,
on something, and I'm just waiting for the announcement.
we're getting ready to have some more fun. And John and Jean-Yves, I look forward to talking to you guys soon. I'll try to give you a call in the next few days.
All right, they certainly will do that. Let me speak with them, and I'll talk to you later, sir.
All right, sir. Take
All right,
care.
thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Okay, Mr. Therien. So we let Mr. Corley move on there for a second, but I just want to chat with you because you were right there. Do you know anything about his family and what kind of father he was to the kids?
Well, I can tell you that he had actually two families. His first family, I know his wife very well, and she was a very nice person. And he had a son and a daughter, and they both turned out to be very good. And the daughter, she seems to be in the same footstep as the father. She was a
Oh,
great competitor in karate, and I think she was a great competitor in weapons also. And then she left for some reason, and she became one. She's in modeling, and she's doing very good.
oh, very nice.
Yeah. Then something happened. Life moves on, and he's got this current family, beautiful wife, very nice person. I don't know her that well, but she is everything of a sweetheart. And they had twins, and the twins might be about 4 years old, I think. And he says, "I got twins, a boy and a girl, and beautiful kids." And I know that he's gone, but the kids will have great memories and stories about their dad when they get older. But the mom is genuine. So they got at least a good mother, and they got maybe 150 uncles and aunts in Canada, because
Yes.
we're all big family.
Right.
So,
Uh,
yes. So,
as we close out, isn't there something going on tomorrow?
yes, tomorrow is the funeral service.
Hmm.
It's in a very big funeral home in Ottawa area, and I know it's tomorrow afternoon between 1 and 4, and I know the place will be packed, jam
Yes.
packed, Jean-Yves, Theriault, and I will be there, and a lot of martial artists will come in and pay their respect and their last salute, if you want to one of the generals. And so it's tomorrow afternoon, and it will be a great, great celebration and send off.
Oh, that is so awesome. How do you think, as I asked this question to Mr. Corley, how do you think Mr. Anderson will be remembered?
Well, for me, it's the champion that he was. It's the great champion. He's a guy. I was talking to and reading things that he's done, and some of the people that he was with, and to go out. He was, first of all, he was a champion, a true champion. I think he was world champion 18 times or something like that. But he also trained with some of the other fighters. Like I spoke about Billy Blanks. Billy Blanks mentioned on Facebook that he had gone and trained with Steve for 2 weeks. And he just couldn't believe how good he was and how hard he trained.
Right.
In the morning, you did your workout, this type of workout. In the afternoon, you did another 2-hour workout. And at night, you did. It's just like the Iceman used to do.
Right.
And that's why these guys become on top. That's why they become the best in their field. Like I'm the kind of guy that if I could not be the best in my field, but I can be the best every day at what I do.
Right.
But these guys with the natural talent that God gave them, but they trained so hard. And that was Steve Anderson, like the Iceman did, like all the great, great champions did.
Right. Well, Mr. Therien, I'm grateful that you took a moment to come on and celebrate the life of Mr. Anderson. And is Jean-Yves still there?
Yes, he is.
Let me get a final thought from Mr. Theriault. And guys, and I just want to say, for those of you who might not know who this man is, I'm going to say who this man is to me, right? That short of idolizing somebody, I guess I did. I guess I might as well to say it. It was Bruce Lee, and then like Jean-Yves, and there was Bill Wallace, right? But me as this kid, as I first it was Bill Wallace, and then later on when I wanted to start knocking more people out, I started idolizing literally Jean-Yves Theriault here, who was just a monster in the ring and all. And so, but I know today it's not so much about you, Mr. Theriault, but hey, look, like I told you, I get a little nervous every time I talk to you.
But I always say it's very, very pleasurable to speak with you. I wanted to mention something about Steve. Maybe something that people don't know. Steve was part of a fundraising over the course of his life that raised hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars for others.
Wow.
And tomorrow, obviously, we're going to celebrate the life of Steve Anderson, his competitiveness, his tenure as champion of the world, and his big heart and the family man that he was. Those are things that people don't see. And I just want to let everybody know that's listening, Steve was a genuine 100% man.
Wow.
We'll miss him.
Wow. Mr. Jean-Yves Theriault, thanks so much for being on the show today. I appreciate all the kind words. I know that there will be some people that will donate to the cause and everything. And I have fond memories of Mr. Anderson. And I certainly just want to say that for he and his family is to give my sincere condolences. But again, the legacy lives on.
Forward march.
Forward march. Thank you, sir. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we were speaking there with Mr. Joe Corley, Mr. Jean Therien, and the great legendary kickboxing champion, Jean-Yves Theriault, celebrating the life of Steve Nasty Anderson, who we lost last week. Again, this was a legend in the point karate world. We will miss him, his spirit, his great attitude, his competitive nature, all of those things. They're gone on, but that legacy will certainly live on. Look, guys, we want to thank you so much for watching Johnny Davis live today. We hope that everyone will have a great weekend. We'll be in Columbia, South Carolina this weekend at Mr. Lance Adams Club for an IKEA Point Muay Thai and Kickboxing Sparring Tournament. Again, guys, always Fort March. This is Johnny Davis Live, and I'm checking out. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.